Hello and welcome back to chapter 4. So, as you know, I'm reading The King of the Things. I've already read chapter 1, 2, 3 in previous videos, and I'm reading chapter 4, Into the Forest. So now, the important question is that you can answer is, are you sitting comfortably?
Yes, I am.
Then I'll begin. Hunch felt as bad as any dog kicked by its master. He stood there, his eyes welling with tears, his mouth hanging open, in the middle of that barn full of merry music and laughter. Suddenly he felt as if everyone was laughing at him. He wished that the floor of the barn would open up and swallow him whole. How stupid he'd been, thinking he could attend. The woodcutter was right. He was too ugly for other people to want around. Hunch dropped his bag of copper coins. They burst open and went rolling and spinning across the floor in all directions. For the first time since he was a very little boy, Hunch began to run. He hobbled along in lurching strides, gripping his hazel staff for support. And once they had carried him outside the barn, those feet of his did not stop until they reached his cottage. And once at the cottage, they did not stop until they had crossed the bridge over the river. There was a voice echoing in his head. His voice, at first as silent as a whisper, and then louder than drums beating. Oh, why was I born me? He did not stop running until he came to the edge of the forest. And once at the edge of the forest, he ran on and on, deep inside the woods. And deep inside the woods, stumbling along with the soft thud, thud, thud of his footfall and the gentle tack, tack, tack of his hazel staff as it peg-legged him along. And the loudest sound of all was the echo in his head, that now simply said, "Why me? Why me? Why me?" Hunch did not stop running, if you can call it that, for it was more like a rolling stumble. Fueled by a power he never thought he had, Hunch stumbled along, with his heart pounding and tears streaming down his face. Even the sharp thorns and clinging vines did not manage to halt him. Hunch became aware of how thick and tall the trees were now. Their old, gnarled trunk rose from the dank earth as feeble strands of waning sunlight struggled through the gaps in the canopy. And only here, only now did he finally stop. Hunch felt the ache of his legs and the beating of his exhausted lungs. Within his chest, boom, boom, boom. He had run and run as best as he could with that stupid lump on his back. He felt dizzy. This was far further than he had ever come. At school he had never run, because that hump that was there all along, that hump. But this evening he had learned he could run, or sort of, at least, and a greater distance than he had ever imagined possible. Only once he recovered his breath did the boy gather his wits and look around him. He knew immediately he should never have run so far, so deep into the forest. What of the strange creatures that were said to live here in its shadowy depths? Things so strange that no one could describe them. Looking around, all he saw was trees in every direction. Hunch had always seen the trees as his friends, especially since he had planted so many saplings to make up for Tax's shopping. He suddenly thought of his friends, the squirrels. They were always following him around whenever he was near the forest. A brief flame of hope burned in his heart. He tried to scan the uppermost branches, looking for some sign of little quiz up there, darting about. But here the trees stood too high and too thick, and there was too much shadow among the tangled branches to see anything clearly. He stood surrounded by the deepness of the forbidden centre of the wild forest. Unfamiliar trees towered above him like silent sentinels, their trunks stretching into the shadows. Hunch trembled. What if some terrible creature was lurking behind the very next trunk? He sensed the darkness thickening, and now he knew that somewhere out there, beyond the endless wall of forest, the sun was sinking low across the edge of the world. Soon it would be night. He had better get going. He turned his head for home, but the darkness stood close around him. All he could see were more and more trees fading into the thickening shadow. Then he spotted a short tail that might have been left by a short trail that might have been left by his passage through the forest. The forest floor was hard with fallen twigs and cracked earth. He could not be sure which way was back. He walked a few steps with his staff going tack, tack, tack alongside him, and then he stopped. What if the noise of his tapping stick had disturbed some foul creature? He was out there all alone. God, how I hate being me, he thought with a sob. Life is so unfair. Hunch took a few panicked footsteps in one direction, then he turned and went another, and then he turned again. Tears welled up in his eyes, and a sore ache began to throb in his chest and his throat. He had no idea which direction he had come from. With a sense of rising terror, he admitted that he was lost. What was he to do? Was it safe to stay still and quiet in this one place, or should he dare to try to find his way out? Even if he made some noise, what would you do if this happened to you? It's the end of chapter 4. I'll read chapter 5 very soon. Hope you're enjoying it. It's great to be here with you all. Loads of love, and I hope you're doing okay wherever you are.